My son dumped me in a nursing home for being a burden. So I taught him what a real burden feels like. If this story strikes a chord with you, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this one ends, and you might want to grab some tissues. Picture this. I'm 68 years old, standing in a cold, sterile hallway of Meadowbrook Nursing Home, clutching a garbage bag, containing everything my son David decided I was worth. My arthritic hands shake as I hold on to the only possessions he deemed necessary for my new life. The harsh smell of disinfectant burns my nostrils, but not as much as the tears I'm fighting to hold back. I watch my only child fidget with his BMW keys, checking his Rolex, clearly counting the minutes until he can escape. This is the same little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "Mommy, don't leave me." Now he can't wait to leave me. "Mum, this is for the best," he says, his voice hollow, his eyes studying the floor tiles as if they hold the secrets of the universe. Anything to avoid looking at his mother's face. "Jenny and we just can't handle it anymore. You're becoming too much of a burden." A burden. Those words didn't just hit me. They shattered every bone in my body, every dream I'd ever had, every sacrifice I'd ever made. This was the same child I held against my chest for hours when he had colic, walking the floors at 3 a.m. while my feet swelled and my back screamed in pain. The same little boy I rocked to sleep every single night after his daddy died in that car accident, when he was only 8 years old and kept asking why daddy wasn't coming home. This was the child I worked 3 jobs for, cleaning office buildings until my knees gave out, stocking shelves at the grocery store until my hands cracked and bled, doing bookkeeping by lamplight after he went to sleep because we couldn't afford proper electricity. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years, with duct tape holding the lining together so he could have a new one each year. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, when there was dinner, so he could have real meals with vegetables and milk. I gave him everything: my youth, my health, my dreams, my future. I never went on a single date after his father died, because every man who showed interest couldn't understand why my son came first. I turned down a promotion that would have changed our lives because it meant traveling, and I couldn't bear the thought of leaving him alone. And now, as I stand in this hallway that smells like broken dreams and forgotten promises, he's telling me I'm too much. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows that make everyone look like ghosts. Other residents shuffle past, some with walkers, others being pushed in wheelchairs, but none of them look as abandoned as I feel in this moment. My heart isn't just breaking, it's disintegrating, turning to ash in my chest. But little did David know, he had just awakened something in his mother that had been sleeping for too long. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life, the instant his BMW disappeared down the driveway, the same driveway where I taught him to ride his first bicycle, where I cheered when he took his first steps, where I waited every day after school with homemade cookies. I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The rage wasn't just overwhelming, it was all-consuming. But beneath that rage was something deeper, more powerful, the primal instinct of a mother whose cub had just turned on her. He thought he could abandon me, discard me like yesterday's newspaper. Oh, my sweet, foolish boy. You have no idea what you've just unleashed. That first night in the nursing home was the longest of my life. The bed felt like a slab of concrete, and the thin, institutional blanket might as well have been tissue paper. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional torture. I lay there, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like tears, listening to Mrs. Henderson in the next room crying for her daughter who never called. The memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. David at 3 years old, running to me with scraped knees and chocolate-stained cheeks, throwing his little arms around my neck and saying, "Mommy, you're my best friend forever." David at 15, angry and rebellious, screaming that he hated me during his father's anniversary, then crawling into my bed at midnight, sobbing and apologizing because the grief was too much to bear alone. I remembered graduation day, when he couldn't afford a cap and gown, and I sold my grandmother's wedding ring, the only thing of value I owned, so he could walk across that stage with dignity. I remembered the pride in his eyes when he got his first job, how he promised me, "Mum, I'm going to take care of you now. You've done enough." What happened to that boy? What happened to those promises? I made a vow that night, watching the digital clock flip from 2:47 a.m. to 2:48 a.m., each minute feeling like an eternity. I wasn't going to fade away quietly. I was going to make him understand, really understand, what it means to carry a burden, what it means to love someone so much that their weight becomes yours, their pain becomes yours, their needs become more important than your own breath. What David had forgotten, what he'd chosen to forget, was that before I became his everything, I was Eleanor Margaret Sullivan, senior accountant at Henderson and Associates. For 32 years, I balanced million-dollar budgets, caught embezzlement schemes that others missed, and managed complex financial systems. My mind was still sharp as a blade, maybe sharper than his. But more than that, I understood people. I understood what made them tick, what they needed, what they feared. I had to. Raising a son alone teaches you to read every micro-expression, every shift in tone, every unspoken need. Within a week at Meadowbrook, I had won over every single staff member. I learned that Maria, the night nurse, was sending money home to her sick mother in El Salvador while saving for her daughter's quinceañera. I discovered that Harold, the maintenance man, had been working double shifts for 3 years to pay for his wife's chemotherapy treatments. I found out that Dr. Peterson, the facility director, had been fighting the corporate office for months to get better funding, better food, better everything for us residents. These people understood sacrifice. They understood love. They recognized it in me, because they lived it every day. I also began studying the other residents and their families with the keen eye of a mother who had spent decades reading bedtime stories and knowing exactly when her child needed comfort. Mrs. Chen received visits from her 3 children every Sunday without fail. They brought homemade soup in thermoses, played mahjong until their fingers were sore, and held her hands while she told the same stories over and over again. Her youngest daughter, Amy, sometimes fell asleep in the chair beside her mother's bed, holding her hand through the night. Mr. Rodriguez's grandchildren came every Tuesday after school, spreading their homework across his bedside table while he helped with math problems. His grandson, Miguel, would read his book reports aloud, asking for feedback, treating his grandfather like the wise man he was, instead of a burden to be managed. These families understood what David had forgotten, that love isn't measured in dollars spent or services provided. It's measured in presence, in patience, in the willingness to hold someone's hand when they're scared. And as I watched these beautiful displays of family devotion, I began to form my plan. This wasn't about revenge. This was about education. David needed to learn what burden really meant, and I was going to be his teacher. Phase 1 was elegant in its simplicity. I started calling David, but not random calls. Calculated, strategic interruptions designed to make him feel exactly what I had felt for 30 years. The first few calls were deceptively innocent. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice. You sound tired. Are you eating enough?" Just like I used to ask when he was young and working his first job. Then came the perfectly timed calls during his most important moments. I had befriended his secretary, Mrs. Patterson, a lovely woman in her 60s, who understood the pain of being dismissed by younger people who thought they knew better. She inadvertently provided me with his entire schedule. I called during his presentation to the Morrison account, the one he'd been preparing for months. I called during his anniversary dinner with Jenny at that expensive restaurant he could barely afford. I called at 3:17 a.m., my voice shaking with genuine tears. David, I'm scared. I can't sleep. Everything here is so strange, and I keep thinking about your father's accident. What if something happens to me and you're not here? Mum, this has to stop, he'd shout into the phone, his voice cracking with frustration. I have a life. I have responsibilities. I can't drop everything every time you feel lonely. Sorry, sweetheart, I'd whisper, letting my voice break just enough. I know I'm being a burden. I just miss my son. I miss the boy who used to tell me I was his best friend. Each call was a masterpiece of maternal manipulation, designed to make him feel the weight of someone else's emotional needs pressing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe. Just like I had felt every single day for 30 years, and I had carried it with love. 3 weeks into my stay, I orchestrated my first medical emergency. I had studied the symptoms carefully: chest pains that could be angina, dizziness that might indicate stroke, shortness of breath that suggested heart failure. Nothing too dramatic, but enough to trigger every protocol in the book. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. David arrived 43 minutes later, his hair disheveled, still wearing his pajama top under his jacket. For just a moment, one beautiful, heartbreaking moment, I saw my little boy again. The child who used to run to my bedside when I had the flu, bringing me water in his tiny hands and patting my forehead with his favorite stuffed animal. Mum, what happened? Are you okay? His voice carried genuine fear, real concern. But then Dr. Peterson delivered the news. She's stable now, but at her age, we need to monitor these episodes closely. She might need more intensive care. And just like that, the mask slipped back into place. David's jaw tightened, his shoulders tensed, and I watched my little boy disappear again behind the wall of resentment and obligation. More care? I thought this place was supposed to handle everything. Isn't that what I'm paying for? The words hung in the air like a slap. Even Dr. Peterson, a man who had heard every excuse and complaint imaginable, looked uncomfortable. That was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I perfected my performance with the skill of a mother who had spent decades knowing exactly when her child needed attention. I had mysterious falls in the bathroom at 2 a.m., dizzy spells during his client meetings, and panic attacks during his rare date nights with Jenny. Each emergency was timed for maximum inconvenience, but also for maximum emotional impact. I wanted him to feel what I had felt all those nights when he had fever, and I paced the floors, terrified and helpless. I wanted him to understand the crushing weight of having someone's life in your hands. But most of all, I wanted him to remember what it felt like to be needed, to be essential to someone's survival. Because somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that being needed is not the same as being burdened. David had convinced me to give him power of attorney for my own protection. But I wasn't the helpless old woman he imagined. I was Eleanor Sullivan, and I had been tracking numbers since before he could tie his shoes. Every expense was documented with the precision of an audit. 4,247 monthly nursing home fees, 847 in medications, 320 for physical therapy, 156 for specialty dietary needs. But I also tracked something more valuable: time. David's time versus everyone else's. In 6 months, he had spent $31,847 on my care, but had visited exactly 14 times, for an average of 37 minutes per visit. That worked out to $2,274 per visit, $61.43 per minute of his precious time spent with his mother. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chen's 3 children had made 67 visits. Mr. Rodriguez's family had visited 94 times. Even Mrs. Patterson, whose son lived 3 states away, received more visits. He came once a month for entire weekends, bringing his children and sometimes sleeping in her room on the fold-out chair. I had my lawyer prepare a comprehensive report, but the most damning evidence wasn't in the numbers. It was in the photos I had started taking: empty chairs during visiting hours, missed birthday celebrations, holidays spent alone while other families gathered around their loved ones. The financial burden he complained about was nothing compared to the emotional poverty he had created. I joined Facebook not for revenge, but for connection. What I found there became my most powerful weapon: the truth. My first post was simple: a photo of my empty room with the caption, "Another quiet Sunday at Meadowbrook." I can hear the Johnson family laughing in the next room. Their son brings his children every week. What beautiful sounds! Children's laughter mixing with their grandfather's stories. I remember when my room used to sound like that. The responses poured in. Strangers offered to visit. Local church groups reached out. But most importantly, David's friends and colleagues began to see. I shared a photo from David's 8th birthday, the year after his father died, showing him blowing out candles on a homemade cake while I stood behind him, my hand on his shoulder, my smile bright despite the exhaustion in my eyes. The caption read, "This was taken 3 months after my husband died." I had worked 16-hour days that week, but I made sure David had his party. I may have been tired, but I was never too tired for love. I wonder sometimes if he remembers that birthday, or if he only remembers the burden I became. But the post that broke the internet and broke hearts across our community was a video I recorded late one night when I couldn't sleep. In it, I was sitting by my window, looking out at the parking lot where other families were arriving for evening visits. "I've been thinking about burden tonight," I said to the camera, my voice soft but clear. When David was small and had nightmares, he would climb into my bed and wrap his little arms around my neck so tight I could barely breathe. But I never called it a burden. When he was sick with pneumonia at 10, and I stayed awake for 4 days straight, holding him, making sure he was breathing, I never called it a burden. When he struggled in high school and I spent my grocery money on tutoring, I never called it a burden. Love isn't a burden. Need isn't a burden. Fear, loneliness, the desire for connection, these aren't burdens. They're just human. And when we love someone, we carry their humanity along with our own, not because we have to, but because we choose to. I carried my son's needs for 30 years, and it made me stronger, not weaker. It gave my life meaning, not burden. But somehow, when it came time for him to carry mine, well, I guess love doesn't always travel both ways. The video was shared 47,000 times. Local news stations picked it up. David's phone wouldn't stop ringing. What happened next was something I never expected. The community embraced me in ways that made me remember what family was supposed to feel like. Mrs. Patterson from the Methodist Church started visiting every Wednesday, bringing not just cookies, but stories about her own struggles with her aging mother. She would hold my hand and say, "I see you, Eleanor. I see your heart, and it's beautiful." The local high school drama club adopted me as their honorary grandmother. Those beautiful teenagers would perform scenes from plays, ask me about my life, and listen, really listen, to my stories. 16-year-old Sarah Martinez told me, "Mrs. Sullivan, my abuela lives with us, and sometimes my mum gets stressed. But watching you, I'm going to make sure she knows she's loved, not a burden." The newspaper story was titled, "The Mother Left Behind, a Community Rallies Around Forgotten Elder." The photo showed me sitting alone in the common room while other residents enjoyed family visits. But what the photo couldn't capture was the strength growing inside me, the realization that I was worth more than my son's narrow definition of convenience. David was drowning in community judgment, but more than that, he was drowning in the truth of what he had done. The confrontation happened on a Thursday afternoon in March. David stormed into my room like a man possessed, his face flushed with anger and something deeper, shame. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, his hands shaking with barely contained emotion. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "Tell me." "What will it take to make this stop? I pay for everything. I arranged the best care. I visit when I can. What more could you possibly want?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, I saw past his anger to the frightened little boy underneath. "I want you to remember that you used to love me," I said quietly. "I want you to remember that I used to be your hero, your safe place, your home. And I want you to understand what it feels like to watch someone you love become a stranger. That's not fair." "You're right," I interrupted. "It's not fair. It wasn't fair when your father died and left me to raise you alone. It wasn't fair when I had to choose between heating the house and buying your school supplies. It wasn't fair when I worked until my hands bled just to give you a chance at a better life. But I never called you a burden, David. Not once." His face crumpled, and suddenly he wasn't a successful insurance executive anymore. He was 8 years old again, sobbing in my arms because the world was too scary and too big. "I didn't know how to handle it," he whispered. "Jenny's parents, the kids' college tuition, work pressure. I felt like I was drowning, and then you needed help too. And I couldn't breathe." "So you decided I was the problem," I said softly. "You decided the mother who sacrificed everything for you was too much to handle." The silence stretched between us like 30 years of misunderstanding. "You planned all of this," he said finally, his voice filled with awe and horror. "The calls, the emergencies, the social media, everything." I smiled through my tears. "David, honey, did you really think the woman who raised you would go quietly into that good night? Did you think the mother who fought the world for you wouldn't fight for herself?" I handed him the folder I had prepared, months of documentation, but also something more precious. Letters. Dozens of letters I had written but never sent, pouring out my heart, my fear, my desperate love for the son who had forgotten how to love me back. "This is what burden really looks like," I said, gesturing to the folder. "This is what it means to carry someone completely, to make their needs more important than your own survival. I did this for 30 years, David. 30 years of sleepless nights, aching backs, empty bank accounts, and dreams deferred. And I called it love." He opened the folder with trembling hands, reading letters that laid bare a mother's broken heart. "My dearest David, today you called me a burden, and I felt something die inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, just a kind of hollow emptiness where my purpose used to live. I keep wondering what I did wrong, what I failed to teach you about love. I dreamed about your father last night. He asked me if I raised you right, if I taught you about family, about loyalty, about the privilege of loving someone through their weakness. I woke up crying because I didn't know how to answer him. I see Mrs. Chen's children visit her today, and I felt jealous. Jealous of an 85-year-old woman because her children understand what mine has forgotten. That taking care of someone you love isn't a burden, it's an honor. By the time he finished reading, we were both sobbing, the kind of tears that come from the deepest places of love and loss and regret. I forgot, David whispered, his voice broken. I forgot that you're not just my mother. You're Eleanor Sullivan, who worked 3 jobs and never complained. You're the woman who sold her wedding ring so I could graduate. You're the person who taught me that love means showing up, even when it's hard. He collapsed into the chair beside my bed, 38 years old, but looking as small and lost as he had the night his father died. I became everything I used to hate. Remember when Grandpa Sullivan put great-grandma in that awful nursing home? Remember how angry you were? You said, David, promise me you'll never abandon family like that. Promise me you'll remember that taking care of people we love is what makes us human. I remembered. I remembered everything. I broke that promise, he sobbed. I broke it. And I broke you. And I don't know how to fix it. You don't fix 30 years of love, David, I said, reaching for his hand. The same hand I had held when he learned to walk, when he was scared of the dark, when he cried over his first broken heart. You honor it. You choose to remember that love isn't convenient, but it's always worth it. What happened next changed everything. David went home that night and had the most honest conversation of his marriage. He told Jenny everything, showed her the letters, the documentation, the evidence of his failure as a son. He expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even an ultimatum. Instead, Jenny surprised them both. I've been watching my own parents age, she said quietly, and I've been terrified of becoming the kind of daughter who sees them as a burden instead of a blessing. Maybe this is our chance to do better? But when they came to bring me home, I made a decision that shocked them both. No, I said simply. I'm not coming home. David looked stricken. But I thought, isn't that what you wanted? What I wanted was for you to remember how to love me, I replied. And now you do. But David, I've discovered something here. I've found friends, purpose, and most importantly, I've found myself again. I'm not just somebody's mother or somebody's burden. I'm Eleanor Sullivan, and I'm exactly where I need to be. The new arrangement we created was beautiful in its simplicity. David visited twice a week, not out of guilt or obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to spend time with me. He brought his children, my grandchildren, who had been kept away during our war. Jenny came too, and slowly, we built something new. But the most beautiful change was in David himself. He started therapy, joined a support group for adult children caring for aging parents, and most importantly, he began talking to his own children about love, sacrifice, and the privilege of caring for family. Our story didn't end with our reconciliation. It began there. David's company, initially concerned about the negative publicity, ultimately featured our story in their newsletter, not as a success story, but as a cautionary tale about the importance of family support systems. They implemented new benefits for employees caring for aging parents. I started speaking at community centers, sharing our story with other families struggling with similar challenges. The most powerful moments came when adult children would approach me afterward, tears streaming down their faces, whispering, I don't want to be like David was. Help me understand how to love better. Meadowbrook implemented new programs based on what we learned: family counseling services, support groups for overwhelmed adult children, and most importantly, education about the difference between being needed and being burdened. But the most beautiful outcome was watching other families change. Mrs. Patterson's son started calling her every day instead of just Sundays. The Martinez family began including their grandmother in family decisions instead of making decisions about her. Small changes that created huge shifts in how love flowed through generations. 6 months after our reconciliation, David visited me on a Tuesday afternoon. Not because it was scheduled, but because he wanted to share good news. His daughter had been accepted to college, and his first thought wasn't about the financial burden, but about calling his mother to share the joy. "I finally understand," he said, holding my hand as we sat in the garden watching other families visit their loved ones. "Love isn't something we carry, it's something that carries us." I squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses he'd developed from helping Harold with maintenance projects around the facility. Work he did not, because he had to, but because he had learned the joy of serving others. "You know what the real tragedy would have been?" I asked him. "If I had let you live your whole life without understanding that loving someone through their weakness doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong. If I had let you miss the privilege of carrying someone you love." As we sat there, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of forgiveness, I realized that my greatest achievement wasn't raising a successful son. It was raising a son who learned how to love, even when love was difficult. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms had grown into a man who understood that love means staying through the storms of life. And that knowledge would shape how he loved his wife, his children, and eventually, how they would love their own families. Being needed isn't a burden, it's a gift. And the greatest tragedy isn't growing old and needing help. It's growing old and having no one who considers your needs worth carrying. If this story moved you to tears, please share it with someone who needs to remember that love is never a burden. It's always a privilege. Hit that subscribe button for more stories that will remind you of what really matters in life. And please, call your parents today. Not because you have to, but because someday you'll wish you could. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by caring for aging parents? Or have you been made to feel like a burden when you needed help? Share your story in the comments. Let's start a conversation about love, family, and the beautiful weight of caring for each other.